friends, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. This is Karthik, thanks for joining with me today. In this video, we are going to see reactive forms. So we will learn reactive forms from the scratch. I'm going to build the create, read, update and delete, all the things from the scratch, and I'll show you various tips, tricks and how to also, show the error message that's coming from the API side as well. Come without delay, let's get started. Back on my screen. So this is the sample app that I built using the Angular, and you can see this in my previous course. I've built all these sample app. You can see the menus, the restaurant, cosines, categories, all those things. All these things are under my tutorial for Angular getting started. So today what we're going to do is all these things that you're seeing, right? So how did we get this data? So we're going to see the admin section. Under the admin section you have categories and cosine. So I will take cosine as the main example here. We can edit a cosine, we can manipulate the data of this particular cosine, we can hit a save. We can also go to the cosine like by going back and click on the create cosine. Here you'll be able to provide a name of the cosine, a new cosine, and the description, and you can hit a save. So which will eventually call a real-time API in the backend, and it will create a cosine for you. Okay, so I'm going to type something here just for demo, a Japanese cosine, and I'm going to give some description. So the name and description do have some restrictions of minimum of characters and maximum of characters. So I'll show you what happens, right? So if I type properly, you will be able to see that it's successfully saved. But what happens, like whatever we save, right? When we type very little amount of data, there is a validation kicks in from our Angular, as well as the API stops creating it. So let's see what happens. So I am providing only less data. See, you see the 5 characters limit came. All these customized messages are coming from the API. So how do we do that? We are going to see all these things in this demo. We're going to see how to map the customized API response to the front end. So another example is you can edit a particular cosine, change it to a different activation status, and it's saved. We can go back, you can see it has changed from active to inactive, right? So you can also set it back to active. So we're gonna see all the code operations here, and then let's go back to another section called category. So this is another section, a different you know like how to use the model pop-up for creating a simple one also. So that's another example I'm going to show you. So here if you see, I'm creating a category that's getting saved here, refreshed. Now you can edit it using a model pop-up. See, all the customized things will come. I'm going to change it to a different one called rings. You can see as soon as I click on update, the update happens, and then you can also see the data refreshed, and I can also delete it. So we're going to see delete, read, update, create, all these things for these two categories. Come, let's get started. Alright, I've opened up the project in the Visual Studio Code. So here what we're going to do is we're going to create a new terminal, and going to do the components admin sections in the CLI commands. So the first thing is I need to create a folder called admin, under which we are going to create a couple of components, routing modules and other things. So we create a component using we create a component using the Angular CLI ng generate component followed by the component name under the admin section. You can see the project is getting built, it is created. We can see by expanding it, so you have the component. So now let's create the admin module. See, admin module is basically an ng module. We have seen this in the previous Angular getting started tutorial. So by using the snippet, we're going to create a module called admin module. Let's clear up unwanted components here. The next thing that we will do is let's import the required modules. The required modules are common module and the form module. So these two are the basic modules that we need. We don't need to write anything else for now. As we develop, we will include the required modules. The next thing is we need an admin routing module, because we need to route to a different route for create, delete, edit, right? So we need to create a routing module. So what we do, we create a default view routing module called cosine view model. So for the cosine view component, when we type admin / cosine, it comes and lands here. Okay, so let's put this into routed components. Let's import all the required thing, and we have the routing component. Now this is the view. So let's first build the view to view all the available cosines, so that from there we can edit, we can do create and other things. So the next few minutes that you will see is how to quickly create a view model where we will display all the cosines that is already there in the API. Okay, so let's do this. And under the ng on init, I'm going to write a method called get cosines, and get cosines will typically call the backend API and it will retrieve all the cosines. So we already have the service cosine service, so we call the get cosines and subscribe to it. So we get all the details, store it in the cosines variable, and let's build the view. So this is going to be consist of a table where you see a couple of columns, and in the last two columns we will eventually build the edit and delete of the cosine, right? So let's quickly build it. So we're going to create a table and put the basic class table hover, and I'm going to copy paste a header which will have name, description, status, and inside the body, as you know, we already have the cosine data, which is an array of cosines. So we'll loop through it and we will put it in the table. So ng for let item of cosines, there was a spelling mistake, so let items of cosine. So item is nothing but one cosine, so we're going to loop it and build the table. So the first one is a name, so we put item.name. The second one is the description, so item.description. This name, description, and other properties are coming from the API model. You have already seen that in the previous Angular getting started demo. Now let's build this. So if the active status is active, we will display as active. If not, it's going to be an inactive. So the color coding will help us for the role. And let's format the code. And the last two things, right? It's basically the edit and delete. So before we go there, let's go and put that view into the admin module. So we created an app routing module, right? We created an admin routing module. So that one we need to put it into the main app routing module. So this is what it is. So we're going to create it the admin section, and that admin section module has been embedded into the main routing. Okay, so now you have everything. What next we have to do is we need to copy paste another top header, right? So in the header you saw that menu, we're going to put a menu for admin. So under the admin we're going to put this menu, and we also put the right routing. See, now you can see the first one is cosine. So when you click on the cosines, there is nothing happening, so there's some error. Let's take a look at the error, right? This is how you will see errors. As and when you build, you'll see errors, and it's okay. As and when you see errors, it is going to help you. There is a bunch of error in the console. Let's read it. So it says this cosine view component that we created, right, under the admin, it is there exists in another module. That's what it says. It's in two places, right? If you remember, when you created this using CLI will automatically append that into the main module. That's why you see this in the app module. Let's clear this off. This has to be under only the admin module. So once this is cleared, see, the build is success. You should be able to see that in the UI. Let's go back to the UI. Okay, so it's getting refreshed. Now if I hover on admin and click on cosines, I can still see the error. So what's that? So let's take a look at the error. It says admin cosine, so it says it's not able to figure out that. It typically says the URL is incorrect. So let's go and click on the app admin module, and you see the routing that we wrote it in the admin routing module was never imported here. That's the problem. So we know how the problem is arising and how to solve it. Good. See, now you can see once we place everything in correctly, this started loading, and you can see all the data was retrieved. There was only three cosines by the time of recording, so you got three things on the screen. Now what we are going to do is we are going to create another component called create cosine component. So the first thing is create, read, update, delete. We have already saw how to read it. That's what we built it, right? That's a view component. So let's quickly create a create cosine component under the same admin section, and we have to do the same following things. We need to put that in the proper admin routing module, so we put that component. Let's clear off this component from anything anywhere else, right? So to avoid the same problem, we add the second routing called cosine. So here when you click on create button, it needs to go to a different routing called cosine slash create. So it's basically admin slash cosine slash create. Once we have that, and you should be able to pull that cosine component for creating. Now because we use the CLI, let's clear off all those things in the other places, and let's verify what's going on here. So we are on the view section. Great. So next, someone has to click on create, right? So I'm going to copy paste a piece of code which will bring me a button in the top right, and when you click on that, there's a router link. It will take me to a different route. So see, you saw the button, and when you click on the button, basically it takes you to the admin slash cosine slash create, and the default content came in. So our component is working basically. Great. Next is we need to build this component very nicely. So I'm gonna start from scratch. Any questions if you have, you can patiently finish seeing this whole thing, and then you can ask me any questions in the comment. Alright, so the first thing is the form. When we use reactive forms, we need to bring up the form group, and we put that into a name called form. Okay, and then let's do a dependency injection for the cosine servers, because the cosine servers eventually will have create cosine calls and other API calls. So we bring up that cosine servers in the constructor. So the first thing is the form. We bring up the required service in the constructor. Now let's build a form using build form method. Anything you can put name. Because I'm going to build a form, I've named as build form. So here it has to return a form group. Now form group will consist of a number of form controls. Okay, the first thing that we want is the name, because if you see, when you create a cosine, eventually you need name, description, active status. Okay, so name is one type of form control. The default value that we are passing is empty string, and if you put a comma and then followed by what you put is the validators. So validators, if you type, that's the default inbuilt validators that comes. So validator dot required, what will happen, eventually the name property will have a required field embedded by the reactive forms. We will see this. The next one that we will build is the description. So once we build description, this is of same new form control, and we don't pass anything, it's an empty string. And here this is also required because name and descriptions are required. Next one is the is active status. That is also a form control. By default we can pass it as true. Okay, alright, so we built a form and we need to initialize this. So in the on ng on init, you initialize this form builder in the form variable. So I'll give you a lot of tips while you develop. So the first thing that you have to, because you're starting from scratch, right? So let's do it in the right way. So what I will do is I will first build the required HTML and make sure there is no error, right? Then I will show you how to use the reactive forms inside the form. So first thing first, let's first build the basic HTML which looks like a form and all the controls are correct. Okay, so we open up a form tag, and then we will write a piece of code which will bring up the text box, the label for name, description, and active status. The active status is basically the select box, so we will go there. The first thing first, right? Under the form, let's bring up the first section, and the first section is the name section. So we put a form group class, okay, and then put a label, and in after the label, the next thing that you will see on the UI is the input box, right? So we will write an input control which is of type text, and then we also put a class called form control, that is just to make sure Bootstrap will show those controls very nicely. And then the placeholder is a default attribute that's already there in the input tag, so we put a placeholder called enter cosine name. So this will show a watermark on the input text box, that's why that is. Max length you can provide 100. The 100 is the maximum character that someone can type. You can also use this max length to be set using the reactive form also. So let's go with the default one. The second one is the description. So it's fairly easy. Copy paste the same section, rename it to the description, and description is gonna be a text area, because we will type more content onto that. The third one is the select box. So we pre-fill this, and you see whatever we typed, it clearly looks like a form, right? We haven't embedded anything with reactive form yet. Don't worry, we'll go there. So now, right now, there is no error. UI looks good. Now I'll show you how to embed that form that we built using the reactive form. So the first thing that you need to do is, under the form tags, write something called form group. Form group, if you remember, form is the variable name for the form group. So we embed the form group, and then we put the form, and for each control we bring it up form control name. Form control name, if you remember, for the name it's name, for description it is description. Form control name is nothing but it will eventually bring up a name attribute for those input controls. Okay, if you go and see the embedded HTML after the form is loaded, that's what you will see. Okay, so these are managed by the Angular, so don't worry. The third one is, again, we need to bring up the form control name and put the form control name is active. Is active, description name, all these things we wrote it in the form builder. Okay, now the next one is button. So we need to have a save button, so I'm gonna bring up the save button. We put all these classes from the bootstrap so that it looks nice. So save is the button, and this is of type basically submit. So when you click on save, it's gonna submit the form. That's why the button is inside the form. Okay, you have to notice that. And how do we trigger it using Angular? So there is something called ng submit. So ng submit event binding, if you do and write a method to be called when they click on submit button, right? So when they click on save, that will eventually bring up them to this on submit button. Okay, this method will be triggered. So in this on submit button we will write some code, so don't worry. So let's all these things are correct, so let's verify this. Let's go back to the view and see whether whatever we wrote is working. No, not nice. It's not working, and it's okay. If you see the console, you'll be able to figure out most of the things. Most of the errors are descriptive. So let's reload and see what's going on. And in the console, if you focus, okay, so when you click on the admin, see here clearly it says this something is wrong. Okay, so let's find out. And if you go to this the build section, it says it cannot find the form group. So form group we wrote, right? So it clearly says which line of code is issue. All right, we know. So if you go to the admin module, we didn't bring up a module called reactive form module. We are writing reactive forms, right? So the form group belongs to the reactive form. It did not find that module, that's why there was an error. So we pull up this reactive form module, and we saved it. Build was success. Let's take a look at the UI, and let's go to the admin, create on cosine, click on create cosine. Right, see, it's loaded. There is no error, which means whatever we wrote so far works good. Now you can type something, you can hit on save, but for now nothing will going to happen. Let's go back to our code and see how to finish this code. Now let's write a method called save cosine. So the save cosine method basically will check whether the form is valid or not. See, under the form there are a lot of properties like touched, no, untouched. There are a lot of properties. One of the property is valid. Valid property will be true only when it satisfies all the controls of the form is properly set with the data. In other words, if the name, description are not provided, or one of those properties are not provided, it will return a false because we have set a validator as required. Okay, that is what the form.valid means. Now once the form is valid, what we have to do is we have to get the form data, right? We need to build a model. So we're going to write a method called get model. Get model will eventually return the required model that we need to pass it to the API. What we need to pass to the API? We need to pass a model called cosine. Cosine will have name, description is active. So let's build this. So we'll create a constant called form value, and we write a method called get raw data. Get raw value is an inbuilt method from the form. So once we write that, we get the data into the form value. All we need to do is we're creating a model of type cosine. So we're casting it basically. So we return a model of type cosine and we are formatting the data. So the cosine will need name, description is active status. So we pull up this name, description, active status from the form value. See, form value dot name, form value dot description, and the third one is form value dot is active. Those three were there in line number 22, 23, 24, right? All those we are going to bring, and this get model will return a type cosine. Okay, all right. So here we are going to check line number 44. If is active is equal to true, we return true. If not, it's going to return false because that's a boolean property. We format the code, everything looks good. Now let's go back to the save cosine. So if the form is valid, we need to assign this model into a local variable called model. So create a constant model and then call this method get model. This will eventually return all the data that we want. Now, fair enough, we call the API service and pass the data. Okay, so this cosine service right now doesn't have create cosine method. Let's quickly create a create cosine method which will post our data. So this create cosine is basically a, a HTTP post method. Okay, so create cosine is a method which will accept a model of type cosine and returns an observable of any. Why any? The return data could be a 400 error or a 500 error, or it could be any results it can return, right? Not like get. That's why it is observable of any. So we format the URL, we do call http.post and pass in this model. That's it. Now let's pull up this cosine service dot create cosine, pass this model and subscribe to it. So when we subscribe to this, there are three possible things can happen. It could be a success, it could be an error, right? So we need to handle it. The first one inside the subscription will go is the success. In other words, it's a next. If you're writing Angular 13, you'll eventually see some TypeScript errors. So this is Angular 13, so don't worry. The first one is the success, okay, which will eventually call a method called on success. Okay, that's a arrow function. On save complete is a method which will be called if the return status was successful. If there was an error, okay, like 400, anything other than 200, 201, like 400 and 500 are all errors. So if API returns an error, it will go to the next method called error response message. Okay, so let's now we will put an alert statement like something went wrong. The third one is on completion, right? It's like a finalize method. So once everything runs, the last one is the finalize method which will run. So that's why I'm putting successfully saved, or I would say successfully completed to differentiate it. Okay, now there is an error on line number 37 because we don't have such method. You can actually create a method using refactoring. See, the method was created for me. Now on this save successful complete, we will do a reset of the form. This dot form dot reset. Okay, if you call this method, it is going to reset our form itself. Okay, all right. So what is still wrong? There's an error, right? So let's find out what is the problem. There was a space between an arrow function. All right, let's format the code. Everything looks good, successfully saved, and we should be good to call this method. So on submit, we simply called save cosine. That's it. Okay, save cosine will validate and it will eventually call API if everything was good. Now we should go back to UI and see how it looks. So we are in the UI. Let's type something. Name is like, I'm just giving, it's not a real cosine name. Okay, sample cosine, and we will see how it looks. So we're gonna put some description and let's see how it works. I've added a description, I've given a name, I've set the status as active or inactive. Okay, so I've provided a status and let's hit on save. And before that, let's bring up the network, clear up, hit on save. You see, save is hit, but the API was not triggered. There was no error, there was no API triggered. Something is wrong. Okay, we need to find out. This is the tricky situation, right? If you don't see error, that's where the real problem is. So you see, ng submit was incorrect. Ng submit, S is a capital letter, so it basically didn't fire our method itself. So I've corrected it. Let's type this name again, sample cosine, and let's put something in the description so that it satisfies the condition. So we're gonna see the happy flow. Okay, don't worry, I will eventually show you how to handle errors, how to write custom validation and everything. So let's put this, hit on save. See, API was triggered, we have sent the data, you can see in the console, and it was successfully saved as well. That's why you got the response as success, and it went to the third method called completion, successfully completed. That's an alert, right? Alert, I really don't like it. So let's bring up a package called toaster package next, and then we'll see how it looks. Okay, so let's bring up the toaster package so that we will have some nice UI when it successfully completes, or even if it gets some error. Okay, so let's gonna install npm ngx toaster. That's a commonly used package to show nice alert messages. Okay, so I'm gonna install that ngx toaster. It's installed, and then I'm going to install another package called ngx spinner. Okay, I'll show you how it looks, because when you call an API, we want to visually show something to the user that there is a background process happening. That's why these two packages I've brought in. So let's configure this toaster module in the app module. So this basically configures a default timeout, and where it has to show those messages. So don't worry about all these things, they are all the basic external packages. So those packages has their own CSS, right? I'm going to bring up those CSS into the Angular project, so that when the Angular is built, these CSS also are embedded into our project. Okay, so we're gonna finalize this by giving the schema. This is as per their documentation, so I've put everything that is required. Okay, you can refer this in our complete course. Don't worry about all these things, we will focus on the reactive forms. So let's run this app ngserve. It's building it. Let's wait for a few more seconds, and let's see how it looks. Now I'm going to go to the create cosine and bring up this toaster into the services. Okay, I'm going to inject the toaster service, and instead of showing this alert, which is not really good, I'm going to use the toaster service and then show a nice message, information. Basically it is successfully saved, so I'm going to show some information. So into this, you can just pass in a message and a title. When it displays, you will see a title and the message into the toaster alert message that shows in the top right. So the title is on completion and the message is completed. Okay, similarly for the error, I think we should put that same message, but instead of info we will put an error message. So this will show in a red color. Okay, that's it, there's no other difference. Error means it's going to show in red color, warning means it's going to show in orange color. Okay, so all this is good. So on save completion, we will also call a method called hey, it is successfully saved. It's going to be in a green color. Okay, so all those different colors, and we can identify what went wrong. Let's fill up this information and see how it looks. Our newly added packages are working or not. So I've filled up the form and hit on save. It's loading, and see, you see those two messages. Okay, now but when you hit on save, there was nothing on the UI. User will not know what's going on. Okay, so we'll see how to fix that. And the two things that we created started showing on the view automatically. The last two things that we just created, right? That's showing up nicely on the UI. Now I said we need to bring up a nice look and feel, right? When you hit on the save, we should show some spinner. So we will go there. Now let's go to this custom the cosine view and going to copy paste a method which will eventually delete our cosine that we created. So inside the view, I'm going to create a method called delete cosine and pass in the ID of the cosine. This is exactly same. Instead of calling the create API, we will call the delete API. So there is no delete API returned in the servers. I'm going to create a delete API. So I'm going to rename it as delete cosine, and the input is just the ID. ID is a number. Okay, So the ID is the number, that's an input, and returnable is same observable of any. And then if you see the URL, it is slightly different. You can refer my the Swagger URL. So it's basically cosine slash ID, and here we need to call the delete method, http.delete. Okay, so everything looks good. Now we need to call this. Okay, so what do we do? When someone click on delete, it will pass a ID, and that ID we are going to call the API to delete it. Okay, so the delete cosine will accept an ID which is passed, subscribing to it. So once I subscribe, again it's three different things: success, error, on completion. Those three things you should remember. Okay, whether you write certain piece in the error or on completion, but these three things will eventually happen whenever you call an API and subscribe to it. Okay, great. So we subscribe to it. The next thing that we need is, let's bring up the toaster again. This is a different component. We wanted to show some nice messages when cosine is deleted. Okay, so we bring up the same toaster servers, so that instead of alert, we can use the toaster servers to display a nice message. So this is on completion. Basically the first one is on save, the second one is on error. Okay, so we're gonna complete the error. There was a mistake, so let's write it. The input is the http error response. Okay, I am putting that into a variable called error res, and let's bring up the namespace. It's not showing up. So it's http error response. See, now it's showing up. We have pulled in that information, and then we're going to write a piece of code. If that happens, we're going to display that with the error message. And the error message is basically, it's going to show toaster.error. It's going to be in a red color, and that is to visually alert them that something is really wrong. Okay, don't worry about all those things. So we will complete this similarly what we did in the create component. Okay, so in the delete, the last piece is the on completion. If everything is success, the final thing which will be called as this one. Okay, so whether it goes to the success or error, the final piece will always be triggered. Okay, so we don't write anything, so we can just name it as the last piece and leave it as the square bracket. Okay, so you see the delete button started coming. Now if you click on delete, okay, see it's successfully deleted. Great, but this item, the fourth item, did not go. If you try to delete again, it shows an error. That's because it's already deleted. It's not happening in our UI. So what we need to do, once it is successfully deleted, we call the get cosines and refresh our UI. So let's see, it's going to build. See, the fourth item went. Let's delete the last one. Once it's built, it's deleted, the item should get refreshed. It did not get refreshed. Let's take a look at the console. What was the error? Let's go to the network. Let's click on delete. Okay, it's loading. Let's quickly create something so that we don't spoil the existing three items which is already working good. So let's type something quickly. Create a sign. I created it. Alright, let's go back to the admin section. Let's go back to the view section. So when I created, see from the create cosine, I wanted to go back, so there was no way I can go back, so I'm gonna put that. So I got this go back. I clicked on it, I went back. See, this navigation is going to help me to go back and forth between this create and the view. Now we are under create, right? See here, when you on the create cosine, there was no visually showing some spinner which will tell user that hey, you clicked on save, something is happening behind the scene, right? So we don't have the spinner. We installed the package, but we never wrote this code here. So I'm gonna bring up that spinner component and put the default content there, and let's see how the spinner is going to show us nicely on the UI. Put some dummy data, and let's click on the save button to see whether the spinner is coming. See, I clicked on save, but the spinner did not come. There is still something that I'm missing. Most likely, when you see these things not working, basically the components are not initialized. Okay, so like the toaster, we need to bring up the service for spinner service. The inject spinner, we need to inject a dependency injection into a constructor, so that's the inject spinner service. But after that, what we need to do is we need to put the spinner and do a call for show call. So spinner.show will bring up the spinner, and once everything is completed, you need to stop the spinner. Use the spinner.hide method. See, these are all inbuilt methods available from the external package, so don't worry about these things. I'm just trying to make this UI nice. So let's quickly see whether this is working. When you copy paste some content, this is just a dummy one, we can delete it always. Now also the spinner did not come. Let's take a look at again and see what's wrong. Okay, so this is because the nginx spinner module, okay, that is not embedded into our admin module. We need to show the spinner, we need to have the spinner ng module to be imported, right? We did not import it. That's the problem. So we have imported now. Let's take a look at the UI and see whether that's going to work now or not. Okay, so I'm showing all these things intentionally because you also will eventually see these kind of mistakes. Okay, this is going to help you how to resolve step by step. There were a couple of issues we are trying to put one by one. See, everything is good now. The spinner started showing up, and there was an error as well, right? Because the spinner was not stopped during the error. And let's copy paste this in the error also, and this will hide the spinner. Let's go back, refresh the screen, and let's type something here quickly. Anything is fine, this is just for the demo. So it's an Italian cosine, and let's hit on save. Spinner came, it was very nice, and spinner went off as soon as it was a successful. So similar to what we saw in the create cosine, so let's copy paste this ngx spinner into a view component, so that when a view is loaded, right, you will see a similar spinning on the screen. So what we need to bring up, we need to bring up the spinner, the ngx spinner service, and it's exactly same. So you trigger this show message whenever you call an API, and you properly stop that when the API is completed. So here if you see, when the get cosines are invoked, we show the spinner, and once we retrieve the data from the subscription method, we call the spinner.hide and hide the spinner. Okay, so that is what we're going to do. So let's cut this inside the subscription method. So first thing is we put that cosine assignment, and the next one is we hide the spinner. As soon as the data comes in, we hide the spinner. Similarly, there was a delete cosine, right? So whenever we delete, we trigger the spinner by showing it on that method, and when an error happens or the successful completion, we hide the spinner. Okay, so let's copy paste the hide spinner on completion as well as on the save. So when the save is completed, we can also put the same code and stop it. So let's go back to UI, create a quick cosine, and let's see how this flow works. So I'm going to create a cosine called Italian, copy paste some description. Okay, so let's gonna copy paste some description here quickly, and we are gonna hit on save. It's processing, it's something wrong. Let's take a look at what is wrong. Okay, so it could be the same thing, so that's why we got an error. So let's click on save. Right now it is successfully completed. Once you hit on go back, see, once the view was loaded, the spinner that we have embedded, it started showing up. Similarly, when you delete, it is deleting, the spinners are showing up, and when it is calling the get cosine also, that will show up properly. And looks like when you delete, the refreshing is not happening. Okay, that's why you can see that error, but we will correct it. Okay, so we have reloaded the page, all this junk, we're going to delete this. It's deleted. See, once it is deleted, it takes few seconds to refresh it. Alright, see, it's going away from the screen. Let me delete all this junk, unnecessary cosines that we created. Now it's much cleaner, right? So we have a valid cosines. So far what we saw was the happy flow. Okay, so now what if a user comes here and they don't do anything and just hit on save, see, the API was not called, but user was never told what is wrong, what is missing. They will not know what it is, right? So let's put a debugger inside the save cosign and see what's happening here. Okay, so when you hit on save, it's gonna bring in our debugger. Okay, okay, so if you hover on this, it clearly says valid is false. As you know, name and description are required field and user has not entered anything. So how do we solve this? We're going to see something interesting here. We're going to build the custom validations. Also, I'll also show you how to show the messages coming from the API also. Okay, first thing first, let's validate from the Angular side. Let's write a method called control, and then which accepts a name, a control name basically, and returns an abstract control or a null. Okay, there was a mistake in the abstract control. It's not about control, so we're gonna correct it. So what this will do is it will do a get under the form with the provided name, and it will see if it is touched, right? If they have entered something or touched inside the control, then it will return the data, or if not, it will return a null. Okay, so we're gonna correct that abstract control. It's corrected. Let's format the code. All right, so we have formatted the code. Now what we are going to do is we are going to put a error class. Okay, has error is a CSS class that I've already added. Okay, we're gonna embed that class into our input control if there was an error, meaning the validation did not pass, so we need to show that error. So for that, what we need to do, class dot has error. Whenever the right hand side condition is true, has error class will be appended automatically. Here in this case, we are going to pass the name. Control is the method that we are calling, and we are passing a name. Name is nothing but our form control name, and it will check whether the form was control touched or not, and it will return the error. So let's create quickly a shared module. Okay, shared module. Why? You're gonna learn a new feature module, how to use it and how to embed that into a different module, and also we're gonna use common components. So the shared module is created. I'm going to quickly create two components inside the shared module. The first one is the display error component. Okay, the reason why I'm creating this is I don't want to copy paste the same HTML so many times in my all the forms. Okay, so for that reason I'm going to create a component called display errors, and I'm also going to create a component called label error. So these two components are created now. Let's put that into the declaration of the shared module, and we will also export the same component. Okay, now the shared module needs to be embedded, meaning imported into our admin module, because anything that you import here, which means whatever was exported under that shared module, the two components can be automatically imported here, because we will eventually use those two components in our validation. Great. Let's go to the first one called label error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste a piece of code and explain you what it is. So this one, right? So this one is an input control. Control is the input for this component, which is of type abstract control or null. Okay, we're going to pass the control from our create component, a particular control, the form control. Okay, and there is a property called error property. This error property will be checking couple of errors and gets the message from the error message. Now we'll put a piece of code in the HTML. This basically checks the property. If there is some error, it's going to display it. Okay, all right, so it's just a nice way to show the error message. Okay, so this is done. The second one is the display errors. Okay, so for now don't worry about all these things. It's just a customized component. I'm trying to put this as beautiful as it can be. You can directly use in your project if you wish. That's how it is configured. So this one is basically going to loop through the message of the errors that we get, or with the errors that we pass, and it is going to show a couple of HTMLs. Okay, that's it. Let's quickly create a class called validate all form. I'm going to copy paste a piece of code. This basically accepts the form group. Form group will eventually have a lot of form controls. Okay, so it will go through all the form controls, and if there is anything which is not correct, like if there is a control uh, which has to be you know which has to be correct in all the validation, and if it is not, it will mark them as error. That is what this will do. Okay, so we're going to do that. And okay, so we're going to validate these forms. Now what we need to do, we need to go back to our create component and use those two components that we used, right, to show those nice labels. We're going to put that component. See, app label error. Label error is a component that we created. If you remember, we're going to put that, pass the control. The control is the input variable, right? We are going to pass the control. Here, the control to the right side is basically going to get the control from the form group and put it into this one. Okay, so this is fine. App label error is good. What we need to do next is, let's remove this debugger. Okay, we don't need all these things. We need to call the validate all forms. Okay, so if the form is not valid, instead of just not doing anything, what we are going to do is we are going to force validate the form. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So for that, let's create a variable called errors, which is of type string array. Okay, okay, now let's go back to our save cosines. We are going to invoke a method called validate all forms. So we will first assign the variable errors into an empty string, like empty array, and then pass in the form to the validate all form field method which was created. Okay, so what this will do is, once they hit on save, okay, it is going to force validate all the controls. All right, so now the first one is typed, hit on save, there was no visually errors. Let's take a look at what's going on. We missed to copy paste this has error into the description. Okay, we need to put this properly, name the description as description, copy paste the other one that we missed, app label error. Now both are in place. Now let's go back to UI and see how it looks now. Okay, did we miss something else? Let's take a look. Okay, so let's put another component, right, the display error. If the error variable has more than one error, it's going to display that automatically. Alright, now let's come back to line number 48 where we initialize the error as empty one. Okay, the next one is we are force validating. Let's click on save. See, we validated the form forcefully because both had the required property and there was nothing written on the UI. It started showing up that class. So the form returned an error and eventually we appended the has error CSS. All right, great. Now see, you typed something, right? You hit on save and we returned, the API returned a 400 bad request, which means the data that we sent was not correct. It clearly says the first one, the name property should be of minimum 5 characters, and the second one, the description should be of minimum, I think, 10 characters. Okay, so how do we embed the error message coming from the API onto your UI? That's the next step that we're going to do. So instead of showing up error on the error message, let's first see whether the error that we received was 400. 400 is a valid bad request, which means API is telling, hey, you sent me these data, there were a couple of issues, please correct it and resubmit your data. That is what the 400 is basically. So if we receive 400, we are going to show them a warning message. If it was not 400, anything else other than 400, which means we cannot do anything, so we show a error message. Okay, so we corrected this, and what we are going to do is, let's say if there is a 400 error message, okay, we are going to force validate the model. Okay, I'm going to bind the properties to our property in our Angular, and also the error message coming from each property, we're going to bind it. Let's create a service called model state form mapper. Okay, so the error that was written was model state error. Okay, so each property will have an error message. Okay, whichever property is incorrect. So I'm going to quickly copy paste a piece of code. Basically, this model state form mapper, you don't need to worry about the logic which is inside. What it does is it accepts the model state error that is returned from the API, and it will also accept the form that we have. Okay, as long as the form property that we have is matching with the form property that API is sending. In our case, name property will match the name property from the API, description property from the description property of the API will match. Every single property will match. If there is an error from our name property, API would have sent us, hey, name is of a property and which requires a minimum of 5 characters. You sent me only 4 characters. That was the error message, right? So once that matches, it retrieves that specific error from those property and bind it. And if it cannot figure out any property that is not matching, it will put it into the error object. You see this error dot push. If it cannot find a particular control in our form, in let me give an example. So we have a property called names, where else only the name is there in the API, which means it's not matching, right? So in that case, it cannot map, this piece of code cannot map uh, the the error coming from the name property to our names property. Okay, I'm just giving an example, but in our case all the properties are matching, so it will properly map the error. Name to name, description to description, is active to is active. Okay, everything will be mapped. Now this logic is done. Let's bring up that concept into our save cosine. So what we are going to do is, once we return an error, once we get the error, we are going to uh, pass in the error response and the form object into our model state form mapper. Okay, once we pass these two, it will automatically do the logic that I just explained you. So let's do this. Okay, we're going to put intentionally some mistake, only 4 characters. You see this, only 4 characters. Okay, and let's hit on save. Very great. See, there was 2 error message which was returned from the API, and we automatically mapped the content that came from the API to our front end. Very nice, right? If you do some mistake from UI, our UI will also handle it. And on top of it, if validations are successfully done from our UI, and if API figure out something is wrong, we are able to show that message onto the UI. So you learn something new, how to map the how to bind the API error response to your UI. This is very important, super important. 400 error message. Not all the companies, everyone is doing this because of several reasons. They don't do it. As long as your API properties and your form properties are correct, same, it is easy for us to show those messages directly on the UI. It will be nice. Think of this. You have a big form, 20, 30 properties. All of a sudden you cannot just keep writing some logic to manually display, right? Once you map these kind of bindings, the controls, whichever is incorrect, is going to automatically show some messages coming up from the API side. All right, great, which is now very nice. So we created a validation message. See, this shows a proper validation from our UI side, and because we don't type anything, right? So that's the initial validation which is handled. Now let's say I go back and remove the validation itself, which is done from our initial Angular side, right? So which means there is no validation for the description, like we don't do anything. So only the first one is kicked in, right? The second one did not do anything. So let's write something proper on the name, 5 characters, and don't type anything on the description. See, it's very clear. Even if you miss from UI, the API sends a proper error message, and we were able to bind that error message onto the UI, and description field is required. Description field should be minimum of 10 characters. Great. The next thing that we are going to build is the edit cosine component. Okay, so the edit cosine and the create cosine has really minimum difference, which we are going to see now. So let's quickly go and create the edit cosine. So I have opened up the terminal. I'm going to use the ng generate component CLI command and create a component called edit cosine. So once I type this, the component is created. As we discussed earlier, we need to clean up the unwanted components which was automatically added into more than one module. So let's go to edit cosine component now, and here edit cosine is basically you're going to edit a particular cosine. So there will be a cosine ID which is of type number. Okay, so under the constructor we will inject couple of services. The first one is the activated route, which is a route service. Okay, so this route service is going to help us to retrieve the ID which is sent in the parameter. I mean to say the ID which is sent in the route parameter. Okay, so we to call this we will use the route dot snapshot dot param map, and we convert that content that we retrieved from the URL, like routed param dot get. And if you see in the edit section, let's gonna copy paste the edit route. So here cosine edit followed by the ID, right? So the cosine ID, this word is important. Cosine ID is the exact parameter that we need to use. Let's go back and use this cosine ID here. So this will assign the cosine ID in the ng on init. So what we need to do, once we have the cosine ID, we need to retrieve a particular cosine detail, right? A particular cosine detail of that ID. So for that, let's inject a service called cosine service. So this cosine service will eventually have another get method which will accept the cosine ID and retrieve only one particular cosine. Okay, this is not an array of cosine, so it's going to return only one cosine. So let's change this URL, and we will modify what is supposed to be returned from this method. So here it's just a single, so get method is going to retrieve and return only the cosine. Okay, so get method is ready, formatted the code. Let's go back. So here what we need to do, once we have the cosine ID, okay, we need to call get cosine, pass in this ID, retrieve the data, and with that data we are going to pre-fill the edit form. Okay, you need to fill up the form, right? Before they start editing, you need to show the existing content. Okay, that is what we are going to do. So this method, which is written in line number 21, it will return a particular cosine and assign it to a cosine variable. Okay, if you see line number 12, cosine is a variable where it will get assigned. Okay, so when do we call this? We need to call once we have the cosine ID, correct? Before that you cannot call. Alright, so we're going to do that. And how do we edit this? Let's go back to the cosine view, and I'm going to copy paste a piece of code which will have an edit section. Okay, so let's come down. There was a delete, if you remember, and the next one inside the column was the edit. So here what we are going to do, we're going to call a get router link method to get the router link and pass in this. See, this one we pass the ID, we format the query. Once they click on a particular edit item, it will put them to a different route, like admin cosine slash the edit cosine slash the ID. See, I'm going to click on edit, and let's see what happens. Okay, so what else is missing? So let's come to the edit cosine, and let's put some data here. Okay, so that we know what is coming here. So I'm going to write a piece of code in the HTML, and this is just to see what is coming. Okay, so we're going to populate the cosine data. So let's click on the edit. All right, see, data came. See, you see this edit slash 19. 19 was the cosine ID, but there was no data on the screen, so we didn't even call this method. Okay, so that is what is missing. So let's go back to our the code, and what we need to do is, once we go back to that ng on init, we need to invoke the get cosine. Okay, so after line number 22, if you invoke get cosine, it will eventually call the method and retrieve the data. Let's go back to cosine, click on edit. Alright, see, data was called and you saw the data. A particular cosine data has been retrieved. Alright, so we have the data, right? Now it's fairly simple for us to create the edit view, exactly same as create. There is only a bare minimum difference. The first difference is retrieving the data, which we just did it. The second is we're going to copy paste every single thing that we have it on the create. It is exactly same, but we need to patch a data. Okay, so and what we're going to do is let's quickly copy paste all the data, whatever was there in the create, exactly same. That's because editing a cosine is same as, like, creating a cosine, right? So when you created a cosine, you had name, description, is active, status, and during edit it is going to be the same property. You are just going to manipulate the data. That's why I copy pasted everything. Let's bring up all the namespaces, so you can do all, import all the missing namespaces. See, everything is good. Now what we need to do is, instead of creating a cosine, we need to update a cosine. Okay, so let's go to cosine servers, create an update cosine. Update cosine will accept a cosine model, and it will post it. It will do a put HTTP. We're going to put that data into a different API, and it is going to update for us. Okay, so the update cosine is going to accept a model. See, update cosines. Okay, so we have put this update. Everything is same. Validation, model binding, everything is same. Okay, so we have built the form, but we haven't embedded the content. Okay, so what we are going to do now, we retrieve the data, right? Once we have the data, what we need to do is we need to do a patch. So we will write a method called private patch cosine. Okay, so this will accept a cosine, which we're gonna send it from the caller, like wherever we invoked, right? 38 line number. From there we will call this. Okay, so here what we need to do is, this is the next important thing. Okay, in order to patch a content into an existing form, you will use the form dot get and then pass in the control name, and you have a method called patch value. In our case, we already have a control, okay, which will accept the control name, and then patch value, pass in the data that was retrieved. So this is what this patch method will do. Okay, so let's invoke this patch method as soon as we receive the data. Okay, so line number 40, we receive the data, and then we invoke the patch method, pass the cosine data. What this will do, the form is built, data is retrieved, and we pre-populate the cosine data into our form that was already loaded. Okay, so in create cosine you saw empty forms. In edit cosine you will see the cosine data pre-filled on the form. That is what this is doing, nothing else. So there are only 2-3 difference. We initialize the form, we retrieve the data based on the parameter that was sent. Once we have the data, we call a patch method to patch the data into our form. That's it, exactly same. So here on the view, I'm going to copy paste exactly the same HTML and just change from create cosine to edit cosine. There is no difference, trust me, every single line is same. Okay, that easy it is to build a reactive forms when you do it in a right way. Okay, so I hope you are following this. Now let's put this ngx spinner into the top, so the spinner is going to show during the edit as well. Okay, so everything looks good. Now I'm trying to re-verify this. All looks good. We're going to see the demo shortly. All right, so let's go back to screen. You see it's already filled. Let's go back and come from first. So I'm going to click on an edit right now. It was loading the data and the data was patched. If the spinner was coming properly, what will happen? This red color thing would have not come. You will not see this delay and all. So because the spinner was not shown, that's why it was not showing it properly. So I have invoked the spinner. I'm going to stop the spinner as soon as the patch is completed. Okay, you see the spinner is running. Let's go back. Let's do it from first. Let's go back to the view. Okay, click on particular thing. See, it's the spinner is loading, data is retrieved, patched, spinner went off. Great. That's it. Edit is looking awesome. So we learned how, and create, edit, read is working, delete also working. So see, you were able to update a particular item, and see, from it changed from active to inactive. You can set it to inactive, you can set it to active, you can change the name, you can change the content of the description. If API is going to handle it properly, meaning let's say you're trying to create a same cosine name, the API will able to handle it and send back a particular error message. So that error message also will be displayed on the screen properly. Okay, so let's take a look. So I'm going to change the name to French cosine. I was able to create it successfully. Let's go back and see whether the name was changed. See, the fourth item, the name of the cosine was changed. ID remains same, name was changed. That's how the put will work. So now you learned how to do a read, create, update, delete. Okay, we saw that with a good one. I'm going to show you another one called categories. It is exactly same. The only difference here is we're going to show this edit on a model pop-up. So I've already created this code. I will walk you through this code. You other than that, everything is same. So when you do an edit, the data, meaning the form, is brought up onto the model. That's it. Okay, so this is another way of example that I can show you. You can see the source code. So let's create a item called ice cream. That's the category. Okay, so I created it. You see the spinner is same, the response is going to be same. You see the stop right, it's loaded into the left hand side, it came as inactive. I'm going to edit this, click on active, update it, exactly same. The process is uploading. See, it refreshed, you saw from inactive to active. Going to delete it, deleted successfully, refreshed, that item went off. Okay, this is what was done. Coding wise, logic wise, validation wise, everything is same. I'm going to quickly walk you through what component was created, what is done. Okay, so that I will save your time and you can learn and practice more of a valid one, and you can practice more. I'll give you more time here, right? So let's not waste time. So under the admin, I created a folder called category. Under category, exactly same. There was a create category, like category component to view all the categories. Inside this, left side is what you are viewing, right side in the top is what you are creating it. Okay, that's it. And for edit, I have a separate component called edit component, and this content is in the edit component. So how do we bring up this component onto your view component? Like under the view, you click on edit, that is shown in the model pop-up, right? So that is what we are going to focus now. You see this ng template, we are going to put the model, the ng, the bootstrap model here, and inside the body you see, inside, see, this is the one that I'm highlighting. It's simply a bootstrap model. Okay, inside the body you can put anything that you want. Here we are going to put the update category component. In this we pass in the model, so that when you show the data, you don't need to retrieve like we did in the cosine. Directly it knows which category is coming, because there was no URL router, right? You see everything was on the same page, right? So we retrieve the data in the front end itself, we pass in that content, and that will automatically do a patching. Okay, and when you save complete, once everything is completed, it's going to emit an event saying, hey, everything is done, true. Once we retrieve a true event, we will close the model pop-up and we will trigger a get categories. That's the only difference, guys. Everything else is same. Okay, so I hope you can go look at this code. It is same as I said. We just bring up this model, close this once the response is true. Okay, so take a look at this code. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me summarize this, what we learned today. We learned Angular reactive forms. We learned to build, create, edit, delete, read with a nice custom validation. And we also learned very important thing, how to bind the API response, the error message from the API back to our screen. That is something that not everyone teaches you with in deep, but this is how you do, right? So we learned a lot of things today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section how this video was. If you have any suggestions for me, please describe that in the comment section. I will be happy to incorporate those. Thank you guys. Thanks for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe my channel, like it, share it, comment it, and never forget to click on the bell icon.